friends. Bethany Bravery here. Welcome back to another episode of the Bringing Her Hope podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Rachel Engstrom. Rachel, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I just turned 39. I live outside Minneapolis. I actually moved here, it'll be 21 years ago this fall, from a smaller town in Michigan, not knowing one person, and went to the University of Minnesota, got my bachelor's degree in anthropology. And when I was 19, first semester, sophomore year, ended up meeting a guy that I ended up marrying and having a whole life with, which was God's total plan I knew nothing about. So
I love that. That's pretty much how he works. It's like, I'll give you one of the pieces to the puzzle. I love that. So today, friends, we're going to just be unpacking Rachel's journey. She's going to be talking to us about what it looks like to be a wife, what it looks like to be a widow, and then now what? How do you seek the Lord? How do you follow the Lord? How do you lean into him when you navigate really tragic, hard times? So Rachel, why don't you take us on your journey?
Yeah. So I got married when I was 22 in 2004. I just graduated from college, got my first real job. I had been with Grayson for 3 years. And then he worked nights. So we had what I call a space age marriage, in that we hardly ever fought, it was like the nitpicky little stuff, dishes, things like that. But I think the fact that he worked nights was a blessing in disguise I didn't know I would need later, as far as having my own independence and learning all of these things. Because especially when you get married when you're young, I believe, at least in my perspective, you do tons of stuff together all the time during the week, all of these things. So I was still able to have my own jobs, career, friendships, different things outside of us, but still have that stability and that consistency in that relationship. And then when I was 28, in the summer and fall of 2010, I actually started having these, horrific pelvic pains, not knowing what was going on. It turned out I had ovarian cyst rupture. I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And I just remember being in so much pain and just crying out, God, I need your help. I need you here. And I remember calling my dad. My parents and my dad specifically told me, I was a supervisor in a job where there were times where there were layoffs, or people, did things that I had to fire them, or I had to do these things, and there's nothing else you can do except give it to God and pray to God. So that was a big turning point as far as me learning how to handle and hand things over to God in circumstances like that. So I was diagnosed with endometriosis, like I said, but I was told I might not ever be able to have children and things like that. So I became, anxious and depressed, and went on antidepressants and things like that. I have my master's degree in social work, and I was working in mental health. So that by any means wasn't a huge flip of being able to need help and those different things like that. But it was still a really big bummer. Am I going to be able to have kids? Am I not? All these things. And then on New Year's Eve, 2010, we had Chinese food, and my husband had a fortune cookie that said, "You're about to have a major life change." What we didn't know was 15 days later, he would be diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He was sick for 2 years and 3 months, and he got a lot better. He got a lot worse. He relapsed again. We hospitalized him on our 8th wedding anniversary. And then ultimately, and I'll talk about blessings along the way as well. But ultimately, I was told 2 days before my 31st birthday, April 17th, 2013, "I'm sorry," from the doctors. He'd been intubated for the second time in the ICU, was having problems breathing. He had had a bone marrow transplant, and the chemo and radiation and preparation for that just ripped apart many of his different organs. The transplant took, but the preparation for that they had to do was very detrimental. And then it was 2 days later and it's my 31st birthday and it's just all super surreal. And I'm knowing I'm going to be a widow. And what was amazing in this whole time, God gave me such grace because I later learned, in being parts of support groups of young widows and different things that I was seeking online, a lot of women like myself and my age range then at 31, had their husbands blown up in Afghanistan, or they came home and their PTSD got to them and they took their lives, or they go to work and tragic things happen. And I believe the peace that I was given then, which I didn't know or understand at the time, as I have these days leading up to his death, was that I was actually able to be there with him. I saw his body fall apart. No, it didn't make sense in the grand scheme of things why I was only 31 and he was 37 and I was robbed and my life completely blew up like you threw a grenade at it. But I was able to be with him, and biologically I could see his body, our bodies, can only do so much. So I made a heaven playlist for him the Saturday, the 20th, the day after my birthday. And then I held him after they took him off the vent and then waited for his heart to stop. It took about an hour on Sunday, April 21st. So that was, as of last week, 8 years ago.
Wow.
So I had to learn how to navigate, not only how to work full time, but then run home to let my dog out and then run to the hospital, spend time with them 2 to 3 hours at the very beginning, learn treatment, diagnosis, health insurance, disability, employment, all these worlds of nothing I knew about. And then after he died, I had to learn widow logistics. In the illness part too, finances, what you can afford, grants, funding, how do you get help paying for all these things? And then after he died, I had to plan a funeral at 31. I had to figure out work. How do I pay for this house? I thought we would fill with children and I'd have someone help me pay for. And all of a sudden his Social Security disability payment is not there. What do I do? So I wrote a book with my blog post updating along the healthcare journey through Caring Bridge, along with my Facebook posts. I have it all in chronological order. And then my narrative love story. And then when I'm navigating insurance, I help you walk through all of it. Wow. So I help you walk through the entire medical journey, finances, medical, everything. And then when I'm navigating life as a widow, I write it all so you can see all of it. So this is the first of its kind, my book, Wife, Widow, Now What? There's literally nothing like that out there. That is the love story, memoir, healthcare journey, how to do all of it. So I decided a year after he died in 2014 to write this. So I started putting the post in order, and then it was just too painful. I had to stop.
Yeah.
So then I picked it back up in 2018 and I started writing it all and putting it all out. And it definitely was a labor of love. There was a lot of PTSD. It was very painful. And then, I edited the book myself 8 times, had a professional editor do it as well. But each time I would edit it, I was spaced farther and farther away, which was just grace from God. So it got to the point where I look at it and I know that it's me and it's my story, but it's very bizarre as well. It's like, and I cry, like I've been fine the last few years on his death anniversary, and I just lost it this last week. And I think that a big part of that is I'm seeing and feeling in real time what I was going through.
Yeah.
Right now in the state of Minnesota, I'm trying to raise a huge amount of money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for the short-term challenge. And it just brings it to the surface. So it's like I have this scar tissue, but it's being ripped open. And I can talk about it now, like this more clinical level of where I've worked so hard to get here, but it doesn't take away the pain. But, we cry because we had something so significant.
For sure.
We cry because we go through those things. So what's amazing to me is how God has brought me from where I literally say I felt like I was just licking the bottom of the barrel. I'm trying to make ends meet, working all these jobs. I have no family here. I'm a 31-year-old, 32-year-old, 33-year-old widow. I'm, doing 3 part-time jobs, 2 with children with disabilities, 1 with an adult with multiple sclerosis, still selling anything and everything I can on eBay and Amazon and having garage sales and doing all this stuff and attempting to date because I met my person at, 19. So it's trying to figure out all of this and still feeling like I know God's there. I don't have the blueprint. God, I wish you could show me the blueprint, but just trusting and believing that things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to me that it's been 8 years since he died, 10 years since he got sick, and how okay I am to the point where I can now advocate and tell my story. It's pretty crazy cool of what God's done.
Wow. Rachel, take me back to when you guys first received the diagnosis. Tell me from your perspective what your emotions were, what, other people around you, as far as, when you've been helping others as they're in this process of finding out a diagnosis. What are your emotions at that place?
A lot of it was just shock. And it was something that I reflected on later too, is when you're like the significant other, when you're the spouse, you don't really have the luxury of believing anything but that they're going to be fine. So you're the cheerleader, the manager, the everything, like when he came home, I know we're going back, but like when he came home, he had a shopping bag full of meds. So that's like an example where the cancer patient is going through so much. They're in their own personal Afghanistan. Like you just can't let your feelings be shown or known on surface level. So for me, it was just like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is my new life. Whether or not I like it, this is it. And God's going to provide. And we just have to believe that he's going to be okay. And it was a matter of, getting the word out, putting it on these social media platforms, asking for prayers, feeling the prayers. I considered calling my book How Social Media Saved My Life, because just having people from all over the country knowing that they're praying, saying, we're thinking of you, you're in our prayers, virtual hugs, all of those things just really filled my bucket. But when you're going through those things, you pretty much are just in this numb, shocked phase of autopilot. It's like, I have to do what I have to do. And it was a lot of running back and forth and just, that feeling when you're driving and then you kind of snap back into your focus and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I get from here to there? And thank you, God, that I'm still alive.
Yeah.
It was like one long journey of that sometimes.
Do you feel like it's important, or did you have this, maybe a point person or someone who was your support system, who you could be real and raw? I get that you had to kind of hold everything together for your husband and to, be the provider and to do all the research, but did you have someone in your life for that? Or would you recommend, if someone's in that situation, to have that?
Yeah, definitely. I highly recommend that you need to have at least one person that you can vent to, talk to, have your fears, your doubts, all of those things. Leaving him in the hospital was horrific. To have to leave him and go home, especially when he was in there 5 weeks. And I have this episode called the elevator episode, or I talk about it in my book, where, it's like just trying to get myself to leave his room. And then I get to the elevator, but I can't get on, and then running back and all these different things. And I would call friends or family at night on my way home. And it's almost like there was just this unspoken thing. They knew, we'll just let Rachel chatter. We won't talk about ourselves. We'll just, she's in this bubble. This is what she has to do. I think it's really important that we all go through that in life. And it's really important to know that, to have those reciprocal relationships where, people are there as much for you now as you will be for them later. And don't feel like I'm not giving them anything right now. So yeah, it's really important. And then a year after he got sick, I got my own therapist as well, that I went to for a few years. That's so important as well, to have somebody that's a third party. I mean, what I do for a living is I get people connected to counseling, and a behavioral health insurance company. So it's just one of those things where I think everybody should go for counseling. There's unfortunately so much stigma attached to it still, but it's just to have somebody that's your own person that knows nothing about you, but what you're telling them is just crucial.
So true. You mentioned that, and in your book a lot, that you guys, I feel like prayer was your go-to. Prayer was your go-to.
Yeah.
Waiting for tests. Prayer was your go-to after you knew the test. And you mentioned social media and people praying. as a Christian, was it hard for you to have this almost like two hands, like one, this is our reality, and my other hand, I'm hoping that God, will heal my husband. What was that dance like in your relationship and your walk with the Lord?
It was mostly like just giving my entire life on a platter. And I think part of that was just sheer exhaustion. You're so tired all the time, taking care of yourself. Like some days, just even taking a shower seems like a lot, especially in my widow days and things like that. But it was just, I truly believed I'm only 31. He's only 30, or excuse me, I'm only 28. He's only 35 when he first gets sick. I truly believed he would get better and we would just go back to the show at the end of the, episode. There were no commercial breaks or anything like that, but I was firmly believing. And until they told me, he was going to die, I didn't believe it. So he actually was on, life support a month and a half before he actually died, and he miraculously got out. He had a blood clot in his lung. 1 in a million people survive. And I was like, okay, God, I hear you. This is our big thing. We're listening more to you than we ever have before. Within 2 weeks time frame, he went from being on life support in the ICU to being at rehab and learning how to walk and all these different things. So I was, pricing walkers and thinking I'd take him home and help him get stronger and all of these things. So that was just my assumption all the time, that things were going to be fine and big miracles were going to happen. But little did I know that so many miracles were happening even within what I didn't know. I was watching him die and all those things. And yeah.
You mentioned towards the beginning of your book, I just wanted to read this part. You said this was before you knew for sure whether he was going to have cancer. You said, in that moment, I felt it in my bones that my husband had cancer and there was nothing I could do to stop our impending fate. I was oddly calm and credited it to God's grace being upon me. Did that calmness, that almost supernatural peace when you don't understand how everything's going to play out, did you feel like that was kind of this support that the Lord gave you throughout your journey, or did you go back and forth between that?
No, it was the entire time. And I do not judge anyone on any level, but something that I have so much pride in with God is that never once did I get angry. Like never once did I was bitter sometimes, but I'll get to that later, but it's never once did I get angry and say, why God, why? It was more like, later when I'm going through all of our joint possessions and it's, all of his tubs of crap from before when we met. Why'd you leave me with all this stuff to go through, stuff like that. But it's a very serene calmness. And I think part of that was, I can't remember a time in my life where my parents didn't bring me to church and watching them. I just remember being tiny and laying on my parents' laps and looking up at the ceiling fans in church and and hearing them sing and just knowing this is what's carried them through. And I think that that's just the blood in my veins of what is, and believing and trusting and knowing and, seeing the difficult things that my parents, not anything like this, but seeing my parents, they had both lost, their parents younger-ish, in their lives and things like that. And just knowing, we only get one life and it can be taken away at any second.
So true. So I feel like there's probably was a season of grief as just hearing, my husband has cancer, grief for what was lost, grief for your relationship doesn't look the same. But talk to me a little bit now about after he was gone and as you're stepping into your first few days of being a widow, what did that grief, what did that processing, what did those emotions feel like?
Yeah, I really was just so numb and so tired. So like when I'm waiting for my dad to pick up my mom and I, and we're holding all of his stuff, and I will say his death was really as beautiful as it can be. You read it. It's, I play all these songs. He's unfortunately making these animalistic sounds as he's taking his last breaths for the last hour. And then I have the nurse come in, the physician's assistant verify he's not alive. And I cover him up and then I uncover him right before I leave and do this little dance for 15 seconds and play his favorite song and say, you wanted to beat cancer and you did, because ultimately he did. It's the side effects that didn't. And I walk out of the door, and in my book, Rachel 1.0 is when he's alive and ill. Rachel 2.0 is after he dies. And the weirdest thing is like while I'm waiting for my dad to pick us up in the car is you have this like push and pull. The only thing I can liken it to for anyone who's not gone through any of this is like when you're dropping your kid off at daycare for the first time, or, you know, kindergarten or whatever, and you feel that push and pull of, I want to stay, I want to take you with me. Or, you know, I just really had this weird feeling of I'm wanting to go back up, but he's not there anymore. His soul is already gone. He's waiting at heaven. And I have a funny analogy for what it may look like in my book, but it's when he's waiting, but it was just this bizarre feeling of, for days, and even the first couple of weeks of, I'd been running. So it's like I'm a hamster in a wheel and they'd taken the wheel away. So I have to come to terms with the fact that I don't need to worry about his blood levels and his medicine and what he's doing and his breathing stats and all of these things. And then there's a loss in, of course, him, but a loss in the entire medical family. They had been the most amazing people in the world. You know, there's the doctors and the experts and those people, but the nurses that have like done literally everything and seen you through everything. And even, you know, like the person that would take my check card in the cafeteria upstairs, like I knew her, I knew she had kids. And it's like this whole community that you have is all of a sudden gone. Mm-hmm. So it was just weird to kind of snap back into life and think, what now? It was very, very odd.
So we alluded to, and you mentioned you wrote the book, Wife, Widow, Now What? So did the Lord lay this on your heart to write this book? Was it something maybe you even like hesitated on, like, I don't want to go through those feelings or emotion, or did you feel compelled? I'm really curious, just your heart behind how this book became a book.
Yeah, I feel like I felt compelled to do it. It was just, so I was blessed to have I had switched jobs during his illness, and one of the benefits that they offered that I didn't have before was a life insurance policy. So I took one out on both of us. And as my dad has said so many times since I was little, he would say this and I would just think it was the weirdest thing ever, but he'd be like, you know what? Airplane could fly over our house and a wheel could fall off and it could fall through the ceiling and hit me, or, you know, so it's like, whether I got hit by a car or he died from cancer, you know, we had these policies. And thank God that I did that, because I was able to take 8 months off, not working. I went to Alaska for 3 weeks, which was the most amazing thing in the world that I was able to look back on. And I mean, God really puts you in your place when you do something like that and you see glaciers and mountains, you just feel the size of a pea, even if that. So I was able to do that. And then 6 months after he died, I had so much pain, I could barely walk. So then I had a hysterectomy. So then there's a whole nother level of loss and whatnot. But I just knew, you know, my husband's not here anymore. We had cryogenically frozen his sperm, which is what they have you do when you're young and you have cancer, or eggs if you're female. But it was just one of those things where it's like, I can't do this life without him in this way. You know, the kids wouldn't be our kids. And, you know, what's interesting is I know someone now that is also running for the same campaign that I am for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And she's had a child after her husband died using his sperm. And it's interesting because I commend her so much, because I could not do that. But so that was level upon level of loss. But I just remember within my healing days of being at home, it was like February of 2014. And I remember thinking, man, this was hard. I was standing in my bedroom and it was like almost like a gust of wind, you know, blows up your hair or something, and thinking, this was so hard. I should help other people. And it was just like as simple as that. And I mean, in my mind, that had to be God. And I'm the youngest of 4. I have a brother who's 53, a sister who's 51, and a sister who's 41, and I'm 39. And my two sisters have always said, like, you are just so blunt. You are so tell it like it is. I'm the like person that, has to give whoever compliments and then check her, ask how they are, whatever. I just tell it like it is for whatnot. And since he died, I'm more like that. There's no reason to hide anything. I am very proud via God's grace that I have many, many friends that are atheist or agnostic or what, we all have these people in our lives, but I more now than ever am just shouting on a mountaintop everything God has done for me. And I think one of those things is I came through this horrific experience and I'm okay. And I even was able to recognize it not quite a year after he died, 10 months after he died. I'm still here. And I can help people. I need to use his experience and the pain through that. And it's one of those things. What's interesting is every month on the 21st after he died, I would be like, okay, it's been 4 months. It's been 5 months. It's been 6 months. And to me, that was so freeing because it meant I survived. It means I was making it through. And what was amazing is I would read like Sarah Young's Jesus Calling and just cry because I'm like, how does God know this is my life today?
Yes.
And I'm reading Streams in the Desert. I don't know if you know that one. That one is like similar today as well. It's crazy. But within that, I just felt the push of you really have to do this. And then, I lived my life, went through more painful calamity of errors, all of these things. And when I picked it back up in 2018, I just really felt like it was like, okay, God's leading me to put all the gory details, all the beautiful details. And I was able to have the hindsight of healing for years as well, to be able to put it in the perspective of you, Bethany, what you read, because I was going through things in the first few years, whether it was continuing to date and meeting, awful matches and things, but then later realizing I used to be half of a whole and I'm continuing to seek that whole. And it's not the best match necessarily of what I'm doing, but it's, the church that I went to, everyone was elderly. And to me, it was like, this is my home church. It's a block from my house. It didn't occur to me like try a different church. I was doing what was comfortable and familiar at the time and not necessarily making the smartest choices of everything. But that was what I later learned. That was grief, Rachel. And God protected me through all of it to bring me to a point where I was able to say, you know what, I probably did that because of this, or I should have done that. So in my book, I do a lot of talking about self-care for yourself. Obviously self-care for yourself, but also making sure the patient, all the, they take care of their mental health and things as well. But within that, I couldn't fully comprehend why I did what or why things happened until years later. And that's 1,000% God, which is just incredible to know and look back on it and have documented in real time via all these posts.
I love that. I know that there is so many stories of his faithfulness, but if you could choose one that we haven't talked about, what would something that he just rocked your world, or without a doubt that it was him, what would that be?
Yeah. So I was on this cruise that's going to take off from Alaska 2.5 months after my husband, my world, my everything that I've known since I was 19. So the last 11.5 years, it's just gone. And I'm on this cruise in Seward, Alaska, waiting for the boat to take off. And I just start crying. And I'm like, God, Ross, show me that you're here. Show me there's a sign. Grayson, his name was like Grayson Ross. So that's why I said that. He went by Ross. So, what I did is, so I'm going to attack my whole space. Okay. So what I did is I was on this cruise and I said, God, show me there's a sign. Grayson, show me that you're here. And an eagle swoops down right at my eye level, turns and looks at me, and then flies away. And I would just bawled my eyes out. I just could not believe that was happening. And then later, I don't advertise this, on the back of my book or anything like that, but I have found love. Things are good again. You have to read the book to find that out. But I also had an instance where I was wondering, is this the right person? Is this what's happening? And it's like at my workplace years later, and in the middle of just like this business complex, an eagle swoops by again, turns and looks at me. So it's just one of those things that's super crazy, that it can't not be God. I'm one of those people that when you're, like I was talking about in Alaska, but when you're in nature and when you have these things, you know, kind of like when you are driving somewhere and there's tons of snow or tons of rain, and then you drive 2 minutes and it's completely gone and it's sunny, and those things happen. I just had those moments happen in my life where I knew that ultimately I was going to be okay. And I was just cradled by God, and I'd be taken care of. And I knew that things would be okay.
I love your description of all of that. And I also love your posture, because I think you were open to seeing those things too. You know, you were inviting the Lord to say, hey, will you show up? Will you show me a sign? Will you, you know, woo me and romanticize me, you know, with your beautiful sunny day? Just those kinds of things. I think sometimes we can shut him down in grief, or we can be like Adam and Eve, you know, if maybe we're not dealing with grief, but we're dealing with shame, and we want to pull away, and we want to recluse, and we want to isolate. But I feel like you invited him into every part of it, you know, the pain, the hard stuff, and even the moments of beautiful joy, which I think is really, really key. You had mentioned when you were, you know, your first month and second month and third month, where you would be like, yes, I made it. I made it 1 month into being a widow, and those kinds of things. It was almost like, yes, I survived. Where, if someone was asking you, Rachel, when did you get to the place of widowhood that you really started to develop hope for your life, that it was going to be more than just, you know, the label of being a wife of a cancer, you know, someone who struggled with cancer, more than just a widow? When did that hope start to develop in you?
Yeah, you know, I think a really important thing that you need to do is, especially when you're loss of whoever that is, or a really hard circumstance, you need to surround yourselves with positivity, whether it's positive people or music or shows. And I just remember being in my house. It's really bizarre, but I can remember like I'm doing something, packaging something in my kitchen. And it's like the fall of 2013 after he's died. 5-6 months after he's died. And I'm like opening my drawer that had like the tinfoil and the Ziploc bags or whatever. And I'm doing something. And something I had done just cracked me up. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, things are going to be okay. I'm funny, you know? And there are all these times where, so he was a former techno DJ in his early 20s and all these things. So I'm sending, you know, I'm trying to make ends meet, right, to keep my house. So I'm sending these techno records and different things to Germany and Italy and all over the world. So after I work my jobs over the course of a couple of years and whatnot, I'm like sitting on the floor, packaging up these boxes, taping on the labels. And I had so many of them all the time that I'm just watching Everybody Loves Raymond and Friends and Frasier and just belly laughing and realizing like, you know what? This is fun. This is funny. Things are okay. Not everything's sad. I can move forward. And, you know, I had a moment where I'm sure you saw it in the book where one of the 2 cats that we had was always not a snuggly cat. And all of a sudden he becomes snuggly. And I look up like at the ceiling as if there's a portal to heaven. And I'm like, Grayson, are you seeing this? You know, cause I've wanted this for years. So it's these moments of things are going to happen and they're going to be okay. So I would say my time frame was probably, I was starting to see more sunlight come out about 6 months after he died. Funny things would happen. Like we always watched the show The Office together. And I remember sitting in bed watching TV, and it's the series premiere, the last one ever. And I have this moment of panic of, oh my gosh, he's never going to see it. And then I'm like, duh, there's unlimited channels in heaven. Of course he can see whatever he wants. But it's just being able to like stop, be in a moment, reflect on it, and leave it with laughter and know that you're going to be okay. And I think that what's really tough is there are a lot of like there's a lot of negative music and movies and TV shows and all these things that can very easily bring you down. So I think just a great thing to do is surround yourself with positive people, positive things. I talk about it in the book, how I had a friend of 12 years that was one of my best friends. And she was just became very toxic, very negative, very, very judgmental. And I grew out of that friendship, and it was very difficult. And I cut that person out of my life, which is not something I traditionally do, but I prayed on it. And it was just like, you know what? You're in this new season of your life. This is where you are. And the really hard thing is when you go through something with a catastrophic illness or grief, loss, that's something this big of a trauma, is more than likely you're going to lose people. Things shift when the illness is over, when the death is over, people go back to their normal lives. It is the end of the episode of that sitcom. People go back to things. So I learned the hard way that, I lost friends, but I also gained friends in different things. I did 2 half marathons for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society and still have friends to this day that I have a couple, one's in her early 60s, one's about to be 60, that I don't know that I would have met them otherwise. And we go for a walk once a week in our neighborhood, and drive to each other's houses and those things. And they are my prayer warriors, and they're Catholic. I'm not Catholic, but you know what? It doesn't matter. We're all prayer warriors for each other for things. And we've been bound to each other through these tough circumstances. And I think that, knowing that things are going to ebb and change, and we all have those odd things, like when you have your work family and then you leave that job and then you realize, oh, the people I talk to every day, I don't really talk to them anymore. That was a short-term thing. That's actually kind of what it's like when you go through something like this big in your life. But sometimes it is painful to lose certain relationships, things like that. God places other people in your lives for those seasons for a reason of what you're going through.
Absolutely. If you could talk to the widow who's listening or watching today, and you could give them, maybe 3 to 5 pieces of words of encouragement, maybe something that you didn't know, but you learned once you walked through, what would that be?
Yeah. One of my biggest things is, so how in the olden days and like the Yukon Klondike times of Alaska, people would go in the middle of nowhere in snowstorms, totally properly not bundled compared to the outerwear we have today, put it all on the line and leave their families and just try to get those nuggets of gold. More than likely what you're going through, it doesn't make it any more fair or easier or better, but more than likely what you're going through is going to give you a skill to go, or it's going to put something, God's totally putting something on your heart you're not going to reflect on for later, whether it's a volunteer or a job, career, or even just being able to say to somebody, I've been there, I authentically get it, and I'm so sorry. You're going through something so hard right now that maybe it's something that you keep privately, or maybe you're someone like me that you're saying, what, every 3 minutes someone does get diagnosed with blood cancer. Every 9 minutes someone dies from blood cancer. It's the number 1 childhood form of cancer, and 80% of kids right now, that are childhood cancer survivors, the cancer gets cured, but then later they have conditions in life. So you know what? That's not okay. And my husband didn't make it, and that's horrific that he didn't make it, but I can use my passion to advocate in other ways. So more than likely you're getting nuggets of gold that you're not going to be able to see. They're kind of dusty. They're kind of a little buried. They're kind of a little hidden right now, but God's gonna more than likely, at least in my opinion, put something on your heart later to help yourself or help other people.
Oh, that's so beautiful. We're getting ready to kind of wrap up our podcast interview, but I don't want to miss anything that you want to highlight from the book. So if there was, one thing that you're like, first of all, you can get her book at Amazon, and we'll make sure and put that on the show notes. But if you could say, when you pick up this book, I want you to take away this, what would that be?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you're not alone. So this book could be, I specifically wrote it for cancer spouses or significant others. But I'm learning more and more the more I talk about it, and with what's going on in our world, that it's applicable to any illness. It's applicable to COVID. It's applicable to any loss, whether you're the person that's going through it, that is the patient, you're the supporter, you're the family member. You just want to read a book and know, what it's like. You want to be that armchair anthropologist and say, hey, I wonder what it's like to be in this culture. Because it really is a culture of cancer. It's a culture of grief and loss. But it's very isolating. And when you're going through this, the first thing you think is, oh my gosh, I don't want my person to die. But then you do, you get them the medical treatment, but then you have to navigate all of these things that are so complicated. You're probably exhausted and not in the right mind space for it, but I actually lay it all out for you. I can't say I have everything in the world in there, but in my experience, I have a lot of stuff to help you navigate it. So this is a very unique resource, and there's nothing like that. And I think even if you can just take a couple nuggets of wisdom from it, of my story, to know that I went through the worst thing possible and I'm okay today and I'm advocating from it. And I really believe that, God's going to do something in your life to bring you through your tough circumstance as well.
I love that. So again, you can get her book, Wife, Widow, Now What, at Amazon.com. And I know that people are going to want to connect with you, Rachel. So how can they do that?
Yeah. So I am Wife, Widow, Now What on Instagram or Facebook, and you can message me, contact me. I write in quite a few grief and loss and mental health and cancer blogs and different things. So I have different things that I write and post on there too. So you can find me on there.
I love that. And for those of you that don't know, we're also doing a book giveaway today. So you can enter to win at bringingherhope.com for your copy, again, of Wife, Widow, Now What. Rachel, thank you so much just for your transparency, friend. You're reaching out, your vulnerability. And I just love the point of the book is also your story, but also just a resource for people of all of the questions that you have no idea how you're going to navigate, when you're dealing with finances, when you're dealing with insurances. So thank you for being willing. I'm sure this was not only, as far as pulling on your heartstrings to put this together, but also just all that mind space, writing down, making sure you have everything in there for someone else. So not only did, the Lord take them through your journey, but I feel like he's using your story for so many other people and to be an encouragement. So thank you for your faithfulness in saying yes to the Lord in such a hard time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.